Welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odikpo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Welcome to Insight.
Well, on this episode, we will discuss the planned budget for the 2022 fiscal year and how certain provisions of that appropriation bill are likely to impact on the economy and Nigerians at large. It is important to draw attention yet again to efforts by the federal government to sustain the January to December budget cycle. But is that enough to fast-track economic growth and sustain development? I will be speaking with an economic expert on some of these issues. Elizabeth is here, of course, and she will be leading another conversation as well.
Well, still on our plate is women empowerment and political leadership. And we'll put a little twist, the position of religion on the latter.
Very well then, let's begin. Well, now we'll begin my conversation on the 2022 Appropriation Bill, and my guest is Dr. Muda Yusuf, former Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Yusuf is in Lagos and joins us via Zoom. Welcome to Insight. Doc, glad you could join us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be with you.
Great. Let me allow you to establish a basis for our conversation by glossing over the fundamentals of the budget estimate for 2022. As the budget envisioned to ginger economic growth and sustainability, what are your thoughts on its prospects against prevailing economic indices? Bearing in mind that even the president acknowledges issues like insecurity across the country, a recent economic crisis with regards to the prices of crude oil, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, first, I think we should commend the timeliness of the budget's presentation.
Indeed.
This, of course, will help in the implementation, and this is also consistent with the promise of the president and the government that the January to December cycle of budget will be restored. So one should commend both the National Assembly and the executive for making this happen. And it's also good news that the National Assembly has promised that this budget will be passed before the end of the year. So that, I think, we must acknowledge and we must also commend. Secondly, when we talk about budgets, there are two major components to the budget. There is a policy component, which is embedded or encapsulated in the fiscal strategy paper. There is the expenditure component, which is also essentially the appropriation, which is the expenditure framework. That is why before the budget is presented, the National Assembly always approves a medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper.
True.
So we need to look at both the policy content and the appropriation content. On the policy, on the appropriation content, the prioritization of expenditure, I think we must also commend. Given the challenges of security that we have, the highest provision was actually, and rightly so, focused on issue of security. That is defense and all others, which is a good thing to tackle the issues of insecurity. Then, of course, appropriate prioritization was also accorded to issues of infrastructure, power, roads, railways, education, health, and all of that. So in terms of the priority of spending, security and infrastructure were accorded the appropriate kind of priority, which is also good from the point of view of appropriation. This budget, of course, is the largest that we have seen in nominal terms.
Indeed.
6.39 trillion. That is quite a number. And
it's a record, actually.
We were told in the budget presentation that all the MDAs and the government-owned enterprises expenditure and budget were also incorporated into the budget. Perhaps that is also why we have the kind of budget that we have. So generally, I think in terms of the priorities, the appropriation looks okay. In terms of the policy context, of course, there is the issue of the gender issue, which for the first time is coming within the narrative of the budget. Each of the ministries will now have to have a gender focus and have to also give a report on the gender content of the implementation of the budget. That for me is also good because of the role of gender, the role of women, and the strategic role that women play both in the family and issues of bringing up the children and all of that, and even in education, an issue of proper parenting. So that, I think, is also a very good thing. Of course, there are concerns which the government, which the president also alluded to, around issues of the deficit, around issues of the debt, whether it is sustainable or not. These are issues that have been a subject of debate, especially given the fact that in terms of revenue performance, the trend in the last couple of years has not been very good. So those are some areas of concern that we may have to further discuss as we progress.
But let me just quickly take you up on this concern that you've raised. I mean, let's talk about the projected new borrowings of 4.89 trillion as captured in the proposal. I'm sure you heard the president's point on borrowing, which was later, of course, buttressed by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Essentially, Nigeria is still under the global threshold in the area of borrowing. I know that the World Bank's threshold is 25% of GDP, and Nigeria is still at 23%, it would seem. I have a two-part question for you, Dr. Yusuf. One, though the federal government has explained that these borrowings would be channeled towards capital projects and spendings, what are the dangers of borrowing to finance consumption and mounting expenditure? That's one. Two, how is it possible for Nigeria to spend its way out of recession and curb hyperinflation at the same time?
Yeah, thank you very much. Borrowing to fund capital expenditure, particularly infrastructure, is a good thing. And if you look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that is the emphasis in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That whenever we are borrowing as a country, first, the borrowing must be focused on capital projects, human development, and also the borrowing must be concessionary. Those are the conditions as stipulated or prescribed in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So that, of course, is a good thing. But what we have found is that given the very structure of the budget itself, at the end of the year, we'll be lucky if we're able to have up to 30% 30% capital budget implementation. So invariably, as some of the borrowed funds also end up in the funding of recurrent expenditure. Unfortunately, as the minister also said, it has been extremely difficult to cut down on recurrent expenditure. Perhaps for political reasons, for social reasons, and all of that. So it has been quite sticky. It's a sticky point. And when you have a situation where you are not able to cut your expenditure, particularly recurrent, and you are having challenges with revenue, invariably it has a way of expanding the deficit and also expanding the challenge of debt service. So if you have a situation where there's a spillover of having to spend some of the borrowed funds into recurrent, that could create a sustainability problem. Because the beauty of some of this debt is to be able to build the capacity of the economy to be able to repay the debt. It may not be immediate, but at least in the medium to long term, if there's a lot more investment in infrastructure, the capacity of the economy to grow and to be able to generate the revenue to repay the debt will be there. But that is not exactly what we are seeing. At the end of the day, the capital component of the budget, will be lucky if it is up to 20%. So we have a total budget that is heavily weighed.
Are you saying this against the backdrop are you saying this against the backdrop of the 2020 budget and the statements by the budget office, the concerns actually raised by the budget office in terms of implementation of the 2020 budget?
Yes, some of these things are some of the issues that have been affecting the budgetary process. And this, of course, was also highlighted by the president in his speech to the National Assembly. He talked about revenue shortfalls. in the first half of the year, almost 34% shortfall in revenue in the area of oil revenue and all of that. Of course, there was a fairly good performance in the area of non-oil revenue.
Exactly.
But of course, the oil revenue we had challenges because of the volatilities
Of the
in oil
international,
price, because
yes.
of disruptions in output, OPEC issues, and so on. So all along, we have been having serious revenue challenges. And if you look at even the medium-term reports, the half-year report that was presented by the finance minister, the debt service to revenue in that presentation was close to 90%. Of course, maybe by the end of the year, the situation will have gotten better. But generally, the challenge is about the metrics that we are using. If we continue to sustain the metrics of saying debt to GDP ratio, then we may have some issues. We may have issues because when it comes to servicing debt, it is GDP it is revenue that you use to service debt. You don't use GDP to service debt.
Indeed.
But if you have a situation as you have in some other climes, where there is a strong correlation between GDP and revenue, then that kind of metrics can work. But in our own environment, there is no serious, strong correlation between the GDP and the revenue, because you have a large component of the GDP that are not revenue generating. Take the agricultural sector, for instance. Agri contributes about 23 or 24% to GDP. What is the contribution of agriculture to revenue? It's almost nil. Because of the structure of agriculture, because most of the players are the smallholder farmers, most of the operators are in the informal sector. Therefore, getting revenue from that kind of structure is very difficult. The same thing with distributive trade. Distributive trade accounts for about 16% of GDP. The distributive trade sector is populated by the informal sector, by small traders. How much tax, how much revenue can you get from them? So that is the challenge of using GDP as a metric to determine sustainability.
I get that clearly now.
To look a lot more at the issue of the capacity to generate revenue to service the debt.
Well, government has always said our problem is revenue based. But that answers all of what you've explained. Answers the first part of my question. How does that apply, or how would you talk about the issue that I raised about spending our way out of recession and curbing hyperinflation at the same time?
Well, spending our way out of recession is an economic principle that we recognize. There is this Keynesian model of fixing an economy. And the Keynesian model is about a lot more spending to get out of recession, which is not a bad thing. But the kind of spending is also very important. If you have a situation where the central bank is funding a huge part of the deficit, that can be highly, highly inflationary.
Okay.
And that component of it, we need to play it down significantly. Because there's a provision in the CBN Act that we can only support government financing to the tune of 5% of actual revenue of the previous year. But the CBN has gone far above that, and that also has contributed to the hyperinflation that we're experiencing. So it is good to spend our way out, but we have to worry about the source of the funding for the spending. We need to play down on the use of CBN overdraft and focus a lot more on some other sources of revenue.
Okay, so because earlier on, and I'm going to this question because you raised the issue of our revenues rising from the non-oil sector. So even though our revenues have increased, for instance, from the non-oil sector at over 100%, I'm sure, we however still have a revenue generating problem. That was something I talked about just a couple of minutes ago. Well, Doc, let me ask you something. If Nigeria, if this were a business, as every government should be typically, what would a shrewd business owner do in these circumstances? To optimize cost, increase profits, whilst factoring issues like salaries, pensions, debt management or servicing, and possibly expansion. If I recall correctly, the Director General, and I talked about this earlier, the Director General of the Budget Office, Dr. Ken Akabueze, was quoted quite recently as saying that, insisting in fact, that our problem is more of poor earnings than extravagant spending. Talk to me, Doc, in terms of cost management of governance and profits marginalization.
You see, our problem is both.
Okay.
It's both issue of cost of governance and issue of revenue. I think it's a combination of the two. And if this were a business, first, the first thing to do is to identify non-revenue generating areas that are not so critical, and we shut them down. Now, there are some segments of government operations that have constituted a major burden to government, and they are not contributing either to revenue or to social development or something like that. So there are some elements of this, and the president said that you can easily either sell off or privatize. I mean, look at the case of the refineries, for instance. The refineries, the cost of maintaining those refineries are huge. And these refineries have been declaring losses, close to almost 100 billion, So that, of course, is a concern. You need to identify those areas that you can easily cede to the private sector and sell them off and use the proceeds to sustain the fiscal position. Secondly, we need to ensure, and the president has said this, that within the context of what we call independent revenue. There are some revenue generating agencies.
Yeah.
It has been very difficult to get them to remit properly what we should remit to the federation account. That requires a lot of discipline. It requires a lot of political will. Because I've seen that frustration even being expressed by the leadership of the National Assembly. That many of these parastatals are not remitting to the federation account the way they should remit. So that again is key. And if there are components of infrastructure that the private sector can take on, the president also made this statement in his speech. We identify components of infrastructure that the private sector can take up, and those components are those we describe as bankable infrastructure projects. We take them out and allow the private sector to come into that space, and that will relieve the government of spreading itself very thin in the infrastructure space. So within the context of public-private partnership, a lot of complementary private capital can also come into the space, and that will reduce the financial burden of the federal government. So those are some of the things that we can do to ease the issue of the cost burden and to also show up the revenue. Then we have the big elephant in the room, which is the fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy is a major issue, it's a major burden to government, although it's a politically very difficult issue to also tackle. So we need to accelerate the process of ensuring that we're able to refine our petroleum products domestically in order to reduce the pressure of having to expend our foreign exchange on the importation of petroleum products. That is one. Secondly, for us to be able to exit from this problem of fuel subsidy. Because the fuel subsidy problem is arising because we are relying on imports. So each time there's an increase in crude oil price, the subsidy bills goes up. The smuggling also increases. So both on the side of our foreign exchange earnings, on the side of leakages, on the side of fuel subsidy, this reliance on importation of petroleum products has become a major albatross on the economy. So the earlier we're able to accelerate the process of domestic refining, the better for us, especially from the economic.
I would actually take you up. I'll actually take you up on that, Doc, down the line when I bring up the issue of the Petroleum Industry Act, which I mean the act, the PIA, and then I would like for you to talk a bit about that and what we should do in that. I mean, going forward. Interestingly, Doc, if I own a business and a business that is making more loss than gain or not breaking even, I think I would also consider downsizing, but it's one of the big elephants in the room too as well. When the issue of downsizing comes up, I mean, how it is and how it's
No,
taken.
it's tough politically for political, especially in a democratic dispensation.
Yes.
It's very tough. I mean, we have had this Oronsaye report, which the government has talked about implementing margin ministries, cutting down this. How much progress have we made?
Indeed.
Because the business environment is slightly different from the government environment. Because in
But
government,
there's also the issue of the size of
more
government
concentration.
itself.
Come again?
There's also the issue of the size of government itself.
Yeah, the size of government is a big issue, and that is what is also contributing to the cost of governance. You know, unfortunately, because of the political economy and all of that, these issues have become politically very sensitive, and the government is not so eager to move along those lines. Because the current expenditure, the personnel cost is huge, and it is depriving the economy of the needed funds to deal with infrastructure. So it's a very big issue because of politics, and now we are getting close to 2023. I mean, the government will not be seen to be the one throwing people into the labor market and all of that.
I get
so
that
these
clearly.
are some of the dilemmas that the government also faces.
You know, interestingly, Doc, and incidentally as well, in passing the 2022-2024 medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper, the Senate made representations for cost management and maximizing existing revenue windows. Part of what it came up with include a review of the salary structure of NDAs to reflect Nigeria's current financial position. It also talked about a continuous review of the Fiscal Responsibility Act to ensure remittances to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. In fact, there was a particular session that spiked my interest where the Senate advised the federal government, of course, that the budget should be reviewed and purged, that government should purge some agencies that have demonstrated capacity to stand on their own without recourse to federal government budget. They mentioned NAFDAC, and they also mentioned the Nigerian College of Aviation Technology, ZARIA. These were both cited examples. What do you think of these recommendations?
The recommendations are good, but we need to also be very cautious. Because if you continue to drive all these agencies to go and be chasing revenue, particularly those of them that are not strictly revenue-generating agencies, there will be a backlash on the private sector. Because all the regulatory agencies that interface with the private sector also impose all manner of fees, levies, licensing fees, renewal fees on the private sector. And the private sector is also complaining about the burden of taxation because they pay the normal tax, corporate tax, education tax, and all of that. On top of that, for every agency that they relate with, they also have to pay something. So we need to be cautious in the way we drive all these regulatory agencies to also be focusing on internally generated revenue. I'm not saying they don't need revenue.
Okay.
But we have to maintain a balance between having to create a very good investment climate for investors and also having to generate revenue. There has to be a very good balance between those two objectives.
Great.
So that we don't kill investment in this environment.
So, Doc, I know we have gone through a few of the key assumptions and targets underlining the budget provisions. And I mean elements like oil price at $57 per barrel, oil production is put at 1.88 million barrels per day. The exchange rate, of course, you mentioned earlier, is put at 410 naira to a dollar. There's also the oil revenue, which is pegged at 3.15 trillion naira, and non-oil revenue at 2.13 trillion naira. These fiscal projections, to a large extent, are based on implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act. So, I mean, I have these padded questions for you, Doc, first. And I don't know if you'd like to take notes because they'll be really padded. So, I mean, first, are you skeptical or confident about all of these PIA adjustments and its anticipated impact? That's first. Second, What is your thought on the suggestion being put forward by some experts, even though you've made allusions to it earlier on when you were talking? And I mean, people are now saying, or in some quarters, we hear arguments like government should pursue more investment in crude oil exploration and production. In fact, some people have said it may be wiser, or it is wiser, to invest about 30% of NNPC's profits in converting existing resources into refined products and ending importation of such petroleum products into the country. Third and finally, Doc, for this round, isn't it true that unlocking industrialization through petrochemical remains the viable option for Nigeria's oil and gas sector?
Well, the Petroleum Industry Act first holds a lot of promise for the Nigerian economy. It's going to unlock quite a lot of opportunities in the oil and gas sector, because what we have seen in the past few years is the reluctance of investors to bring in their capital into that space because of the policy issues, because of the regulatory issues, because of lack of clarity and the uncertainty. The Petroleum Industry Act has to a large extent removed that, and it has also to some extent improved the fiscal environment for investors to go there. So from the investment point of view, we are likely to see a lot more investment, even though there is a challenge of this decarbonization, energy transitioning and all of that, which has been slowing down funding to the fossil fuel sector. But even in spite of that, the opportunities are still there, especially given the Petroleum Industry Act and the things that the opportunities that it has created. So for me, it's a very positive development, and it's likely to impact a lot more on revenue, but it may not be immediate. It may take some time for decisions to be made and all of that, medium to long term. But what is important is that we are likely to see a lot more private capital, private investment in that space. And if you see a lot more private investment, then some of the issues you raised about issues of petrochemical and all of that,
yes,
we'll be able to get that done, because petrochemical is a byproduct of refineries and all of that. They go together. And we have been having issues of heavy importation of petrochemical products because the refineries have collapsed. And the refineries have collapsed because they are essentially being managed both by the bureaucracy and the politicians. That is why they have collapsed. So if you have a structure that will remove or disconnect these refineries from the bureaucracy, disconnect them from the political system or the political players, then the prospect of their performance will be much brighter. And if you have that, first, it will reduce fuel importation. Second, it will also reduce the importation of petrochemical products. And that will go a long way in stabilizing our macroeconomic environment, both from the point of view of revenue and from the point of view of conservation of foreign exchange, and from the point of view of even generating foreign exchange. So those are the ways in which these steps and these reforms will impact on the economy.
Correct me if I am wrong, Doc, but for those of us on this side of the divide who are not experts on these issues, I reckon our ultimate goal is to have a GDP growth that will surpass the national population growth of, say, let me put it at 3%. That way, Nigerians will feel the impact of poverty reduction initiatives. I mean, majority of the population now will truly feel the impact of the 4.2% GDP projections, if that is achieved.
You see, GDP growth is good, but sometimes it can be just academic.
Okay.
Because what is very important is what you call the inclusiveness of the growth. You can be growing and you can have jobless growth. You can be growing and poverty is increasing. You can be growing and inequality is increasing. You can be growing and all you have is that you have increasing number of billionaires and many more people are getting poorer. So we have to be very conscious of these issues of growth. That's what we call economic growth. That's what we call economic development.
So for you, which one truly reflects, reflects economic growth? Which one really impacts the most? Or how do we feel it impacts the most on the populace?
No, it's when we link growth to development.
Oh, okay.
And that means that, yes, we are growing, but how do we ensure that the growth benefits the people? And that will be determined by how much you are spending on basic things like education, like health, like transportation, and things like that. And also creating an environment that will enable those who are businesses to be able to create more jobs and to be able to create more employment. So all these other indices or indicators are critical to the impact of growth on development. And how do we also ensure that we have macroeconomic stability? How do we ensure that inflation is low? I mean, look at what is happening to inflation. Look at what is happening to prices now. No matter how much you are earning, what is the value of that? What is the purchasing power? You know, purchasing power has been significantly eroded in the past 1 or 2 years. So these are ways in which you can be growing, but if the macroeconomic environment is also not stable, the benefits of growth will not be felt. If you are not careful, more people will get poorer. So we need to worry about employment. We need to worry about the preservation of the value of the currency. We need to worry about investment. We need to worry about infrastructure. We need to worry about education and health. We need to worry about gender. So these are the key developmental indicators. And some of these, of course, were also highlighted by the president in the speech that was presented. Because, for instance, he made mention of the issue of gender inclusion.
Yes, I mean, you keep talking about gender. This is like the third time that you've mentioned it, Dr. Yusuf. And if I recall correctly, this 2022 Appropriation Bill has been described as Nigeria's most gender-responsive fiscal plan ever. I mean, it would appear that you've had time to flip through and you've possibly identified how the budget, the planned budget speaks to how public resources will be allocated to agreed strategic priorities to promote and achieve gender equality in public life in Nigeria. Can you give us some hints or indications?
Well, the hint is that first, we have very active gender advocates in the NGO space. They have a responsibility to monitor all of this. Each of the MDAs are supposed to present their agenda, you know, within the framework of the budget. And of course, this is not exactly stated in the budget, but has been stated as a major objective of the budget. So it is for each of the MDAs to now come up with their specific programs for gender within the framework of the budget. So it is for those who are gender advocates to now monitor and ensure that there are deliverables along those lines. What we have now are broad policy statements by the government that each of the MDAs should prioritize the issue of gender in their budget implementation.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, former Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I want to thank you so much for your insights on this, on the 2022 Appropriation Bill. You've been a delight. I mean, it's been wonderful listening to your explanations on this. Well, it would have been confusing, but for your very delightful way of simplifying these issues, I mean, I would like to thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my friend.
Elizabeth Amoru is up next with the Media Review segment.
Empowering women in politics and leadership ensures equal participation of women in decision-making, democratic governance and peace-building. It is believed that a nation thrives when sustainable peace, democracy, stability and prosperity are ensured. Gender equality and the political empowerment of women are key elements for the consolidation of sustainable democracies worldwide. And actors in political matters say women should be equal with men in decision for a better future for all. From the local to the global stage, women's political participation are restricted. Women are underrepresented as voters. This occurs despite their proven abilities as leaders and agents of change and their right to participate equally in democratic governance. Changing the narrative is our focus today, and my guest is the National President of the Federation of Muslim Women Associations in Nigeria, Hajat Rafiaido Sani. Thank you so much for joining us on Insights.
Thank you, ma'am. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you so much. Now, empowering women, empowerment of women to assume certain positions in life looks hard. Why is this so?
Alhamdulillah, I may say that might be as a result of the way we look at women, religiously, culturally, and socially. But if we are to take the Islamic aspect of it, a woman in Islam has her roles and responsibilities. And in discharging her responsibilities, all these you have mentioned, she will fit into them squarely. For instance, during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet, as a man, did not work alone. He did all he could in togetherness with his wives and the women of his time. In that era, the women were not left out. They played their own roles as mothers, as wives, as nurses, as doctors, and even as business women. They were able to contribute to the development of the society at that time. And it's not a situation whereby it is only the men that will be doing it. Each one of them contributed in his own way. But you see, in a situation where the knowledge about what is happening is not fully known or fully discharged accordingly, there might be problems. Because when you have the knowledge that a woman was created in order to support the man, in order to make life meaningful to the man, in this regard, with that knowledge, with the education, with the enlightenment, they will be able to work together to make life meaningful to the people in the community or the society. And in Islam, there is no limitation to what level a woman could go in terms of acquisition of knowledge, acquisition of wealth, even acquisition of power. They have their roles to play.
Interesting.
Yes.
Now, in building women for political positions, which involves a lot of factors, which oftentimes clash with the interest from the home front, how do we work out a table for women to really improve?
The mother is the first school of a child. On our laps is the first classroom through which the child will first of all learn all the rudimentaries of life. If she's not at home at that age, the children need her most, and she's going about with political meetings, political work that may even extend to the middle of the night, whereby she may not have the time to see what is happening to her husband and the children at home. That one is not allowed in Islam. But somebody who has already been above that age, for instance, somebody whose children have grown up, they have graduated, they are married, and she doesn't have much to do at home again, she could venture into what we can call politics. But in Islam, we will never allow a woman who is still at the childbearing age to leave her home and start running after politics.
So how do we strike the balance?
We have many of our husbands who are into politics.
Okay.
Let's support them with good advices. Let's support them with prayers at home. Let's support them with admonition. Let's tell them that if people are doing it in the wrong way, you should try to correct the situation. When they come back from their political meetings, you give yourself to them to give them the support and the encouragement they need. If there's anything that is happening in the House of Assembly, the Senate, or you are the president's wife, you should be his ear. You should be his ear. You should listen to what people say about them up there. And when you get back to your inner room, where your husband will be able to listen to you, You tell him, this is what is happening in the community, this is what is happening in the society, this is what the people want from you as our leader. Through that, we will be making our own contribution. You can send write-ups when you find out that most of the things in the society are not going well the way you think they should be. Through this, you are supporting those who are there. And when you now reach the age that you could join them, you too might have learned a lot of things from them and from what is happening. Through that, you will be able to make your own contributions. But in a situation whereby a woman is made a commissioner, she might not reject it if she's called to come and serve. I think that one is a bit softer than her struggling shoulder to shoulder with men at campaigns.
How can we change the narrative? Because it looks like the society does not believe in the leadership of a woman. It happens in other climes. How can we correct this?
The women of the time of the prophet supported him, they participated, but there was limitation to their participation. And the limitation was for them to be able to take care of the home front, not leaving anything to not leaving everything to the outside participation. Because when they do that, they go back home to take care of the home. They were into entrepreneur, they were into medicine, they were into nursing, they were into all that. Even they went to war.
With the current situation across the globe, COVID-19 pandemic has several lessons. What help is there for the Nigerian woman in being independent to contribute economically to the growth of the nation?
Yes. You see, the idea of not allowing women to work might not be too good for our health and the situation in the country. Woman needs to have something that will bring money for her too. She has to be empowered. It does not mean that she has to go out for everything. Like in this digital age, well, a woman can stay at home and be communicating to the whole world and making her own money and making her own impact in the society. I retired from the Teaching Service Commission of Oyo State just last year after 35 years of my own contribution to the teaching service in the state. After that, when I found out I'm still hale and healthy, I started farming.
Interesting.
And just a few months ago, I brought my gari to Abuja here for sale in bags. That one is telling you that as a Muslim, Islam does not say you should not work. But the kind of work you are going to do must not affect your home negatively. So, if you are empowered and you are trying to make your own contribution to your family, you are lessening the problem in the society. The best thing for us now is improvement on education. If you say you are where you were yesterday, you should know that you have not progressed. Therefore, for us to move forward, for us to progress, for us to develop individually and collectively, we need to do something about our education and enlightenment. And through that, we shall be fully empowered. And when you are empowered, the space is the limit. You continue to enjoy the mercy of Almighty God. And you'll be able to bring other women up. And you'll be able to bring your own family up. With that, the problem in our society will be reducing and we will have a better place to live.
Haja Rafia Ido Sani, National President, Federation of Muslim Women Associations in Nigeria. Thank you so much for your contributions on Insight. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And just before we wrap up this episode, I'd like to bring you excerpts from some rather profound conversations I had with two gentlemen in previous episodes in the last year. Elder statesmen, I dare say. I've had cause to recall these conversations time and again over the last year But they particularly come to mind at this point in time as Nigeria celebrates 61 years of nationhood. For us here at the NTA, our goal would remain the promotion of peace, unity and social cohesion, and the belief that our multi-ethnicity and religious diversity are blessings and would ultimately reinforce our togetherness. Let's bring you the excerpt. There are a few challenges out there, and I'll mention a few shortly, but more importantly, do you think we have done enough talking or some serious talking as a people, perhaps in recognition of some of these challenges? Or do you think we're in self-denial over issues like ethnic rivalry, religious intolerance, political exclusion, and the quest for self-determination, power sharing, and violent agitations, to mention a few? Do you think we've done enough talking and dialogue in throwing up some of these issues, or we're in self-denial?
No, we have not done enough talking. That is why we still have these subjects on the agenda of our discussions and development.
Okay, and you don't think we are in self-denial? We do recognize that these challenges succeed?
Well, self-denial only in the sense that we have not strengthened, motivated, and created leadership that is on a sustainable basis that will keep moving these ideas in a way that they form a basis for our continuous existence. Therefore, this oscillation forward and backward has in a way affected our stability and our growth. One will suggest that at least what we have done is to maintain an atmosphere of reasonable peace within which dialogue can subsist. And I think the important thing is to maintain dialogue focused on this agenda which you have outlined, and we will make progress. Rome was not built in a day, so they said.
General, we have constantly made reference to how we should continually strive for collective national interest. As an ideal, patriotism is often invoked to inspire citizens to give their best to the nation. But isn't patriotism latent at best and modeled by leadership? Do you think we have done enough in that direction to perhaps throw up patriotic leadership?
Well, I think there's a presumption here that patriotism is an inspiration that is created by leadership only on its own. Patriotism must be part and parcel of the inherent motivation and desire by the people themselves. And that is why sovereignty belongs to the people. And to exercise that sovereignty, they must be in a position to have some symbiosis or dialogue with leadership, and also vested in them is the power to choose the direction to which leadership should navigate the country, and that is the basis of giving mandate to government to govern.
General IBM, there's absolutely no doubt that as a people and a nation, we've come a long way. But then we've talked about the challenges, subsisting challenges, many of them. And at this point, I'd like for you to speak to the issue of the imperatives for our continued and collective survival as a nation and as a people. What are the imperatives for social cohesion from your own perspective?
Well, first of all, I think that it's a wrong illusion to believe that 60 years or so of statehood is enough for us to think that we have come a long way. In fact, as compared to countries who evolved over 300 years and still have problems inherent in their statehood. Take America, the greatest country, still have fundamental basic issues like serving humanity with all the wealth it has. So we have not come a long way. We have come some way, and we are still in the brew. And we should expect that as compared to the bigger nations, America, China, Russia, who are still fermenting in their own civilization. Whereas we are really a very young nation, but we are ambitious, we are talented, we have the resources, and if we are just the patience to build on what we have, we will certainly become a great nation, not just a great nation, but a great leading nation of the African African world, Africa's contribution to the world.
Dr. Egali, you're not just a good orator, I should say. You're known to be a good writer as well. In fact, I came across a piece you wrote and delivered at an event in Bayelsa State in 2017 to mark the Isaac Boro Day. You talked about the imperatives for moving from underdevelopment and marginalization to rapid development in the Niger Delta. But I am more interested in what you described as the Nigerian reality. I will quote from your speech where you said, and I quote, I would ask them to just put that up so we can see if we have that now. And I'll quote, "In recent times, the unfolding socio-political environment in Nigeria characterized by unbridled intolerance, religious extremism, pervasive violence, high-level corruption, ethnic chauvinism, and irredentist proclivities has tended to make Nigerians to begin to recline into cocoons of self-expressions and creations of spheres of self and group preservation," end of quote. This rings true on many levels and continues to be an issue for us in Nigeria. But again, I'll talk about leadership and ask you this. How can leadership steer us away from all of these misconceptions and perhaps stir up nationalism?
Well, leadership in a multi-ethnic society such as Nigeria must be very broad-minded in order to accommodate and ensure that the interests of all sections are balanced evenly. It's not possible to have a perfect balance, but we can have a fair and even balance that will ensure that no group feels terribly alienated and excluded. And so what leadership needs to do is to ensure, like fortunately, Chapter 3 of the present Constitution and all the previous constitutions that deals with the fundamental objectives of state policy and derivative policies provides the fact that leadership must accommodate everybody. That is, if you're a local government chairman, all components of your local government must feel the impact of your leadership. And you have to be fair to everybody in the local government in allocation of resources, which are scarce. If the same thing at this level of the state, no part of the state, no section of the state should feel excluded. They must feel the impact of the government. And then at the federal level, in fact, the constitution is very hard at the federal level in terms of the fact that the federal government it says that the federal government must be run in a way that takes care of everybody, and the economic and social benefits must ensure that all parts of the country benefit. So the leadership has what Professor George Obiozor called precarious balancing. You know, you have to balance precariously the interest of all parts and ensure that everybody feels the warmth. It's like a parent, a mother, that all the children want to feel the warmth of the mother. So a good leader in the kind of society we have, and those who are placed to lead, have to ensure that everybody feels the impact of the leadership.
And that's it on this episode of the program. Do join us same time next week for more on Insight. My name is Namdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Be nice.